Free Tip Friday. Thought I'd do a little punch dance for you guys, just because it's Friday. So I'm building some bunk beds. Top piece of my headboard here. And I've been doing a lot of routering on this project. Routering dados and roundovers and following templates and routering tenons. It's just been like a clinic on routering. So I thought I would just share a few tips on routering. As some of you may know from working with softwood, especially Douglas fir, routering the edges of Douglas fir can be a very, let's say, it can be a gamble. Everything can be going just fine, and all of a sudden, the corner just shatters and it tears the grain up and just ruins the piece. If you've worked with old growth Doug fir, you probably know that feeling, and it's not a good one. So, I'm going to share with you a few tips on how I overcome the issue of tear out when putting roundovers or profiles on the corners of wood that tends to split really easy. So there's a few different methods, but I've kind of narrowed it down to two key things to make all your routering go really awesome. Those two key things are read the grain and back mill. If you're not familiar with the term back milling, quite simply, it's just running your router in the opposite direction. So typically when you run your router, blades are spinning this way, and you move it that way so that it's cutting in the direction that you're pushing it. And that way you kind of have some back pressure and the thing doesn't want to run away from you. Whereas when you're back milling, you're running in the direction of the blade, which means the blade tends to want to run along the wood and kind of push your router depending on the size of bit that you're using. This is a negative thing. You don't really have as good a feel for the blade when you're doing back milling. So what I like to do is just do a really quick pass back milling, not worrying about going full depth and getting the full profile of the wood, but really just taking the corner off so that when I run it back in the opposite direction, I don't have to worry about the wood tearing out as much. When you take off the majority of the profile on that corner, there's less wood kind of behind the blade that wants to catch and tear out. So oftentimes just doing a quick little pass, back mill style, and then doing your pass from left to right will just eliminate the tear out altogether. But keep in mind, this can depend on the size of the bit as well. The bigger the bit, the more likely you are to just blow stuff up. So you might need to do maybe one or two passes back milling, keeping a good handle on the router before you do that final finishing pass from left to right to give it a nice clean finish, because you don't get quite as clean a finish when you're back milling as well. It tends to leave a little bit more fuzz behind the bit. Other important thing to do is read the grain. And there's a few different ways to read the grain, but this is the way that I do it. So let's have a close-up. All right, so you can see that I got, some different profiles cutting across this straight grain piece of wood. Now, a lot of people think like, okay, well, if you're reading the grain, you can see that the growth rings, well, in this case, they're really straight, but they kind of have a slight angle up this way, which is a good thing, right? Because then when you're cutting across the grain, and so it's not going to tear out. Well, you'll find that not to always be the case. So I don't rely on reading the surface of the growth rings, because a lot of times those will look like they're moving in the right direction, and then you cut and boom, it tears off a big chunk of the edge. So what I've found to be a more reliable way to read the grain is to look at the end grain. So you can see the growth rings are almost vertical, but they have a slight angle across the grain this way. So I often find that when the growth rings are running towards the corner, regardless of the direction that you're routering, you will rarely have a tear out, because those growth rings are getting cut by the blade, and it's a clean cut. Whereas say on this corner over here, if I was running along here, you can see that the growth rings are quite short, because they're dying off on either corner, so that when the blade is coming right this way, those growth rings, because they're running in the same direction as the blade, they're more likely to tear off, right? Because there's just that little section of growth ring holding it on there. So I hope that makes sense to you, and that will prevent you any serious amount of man tears, because you won't destroy your edges and have to throw pieces out as much as I have. So yeah, read your end grain, and if the grain is not looking favorable, back mill. It's as simple as that. And also, it's just a good practice if you're working in like tight corners and you're coming around a corner and your router's coming out towards the edge of the piece in a perpendicular motion. It's regardless of where the grain's going, I always back mill in those situations because I've just had too many man tears, you know? Now it's time for your bonus tip. Because I've been doing so much routering, I've also just made a few simple observations that I thought I might share with you. They're quite simple because I'm a simple human being. And that is, when using like a straight fluted bit to like router out housings or like do dados and rabbets and that sort of stuff, I have found that the larger diameter bits are actually way easier to control and use. And some of you might be like, oh, well, obviously. Other people might be like, oh, I would have thought it would have been the other way around. And that the bigger the bit, the more likely it is to like run away on you, or harder it would be to control because you're cutting more wood, etc., etc. But I have found that to be quite untrue. And these little 1/2-inch diameter fluted bits, these suckers are the hardest ones to control. And they wanted, you know, you're trying to move some wood and then all of a sudden it goes, it does that freaking thing. They're freaking out and you're like looking for blood because you know the noise when the router does that thing. If you ever had that happen, it scares the shit out of you. Anyways, to avoid that from happening to you, use a large diameter bit. It just does a better job all around and it's quite easy to control compared to these 1/2-inch diameter suckers. Okay, this is also the bit. It's got a top mounted bearing. This is the one that I use in my my router box where I flatten my slabs with it. A lot of people are like, what bit do you use? It's just a 1-inch diameter by 1.5 inch deep, top mounted bearing, fluted bit, jigama thinger. And I know you can get larger diameter ones for like flattening slabs and you know, you can get these crazy carbide rotatable tip ones and you know, but honestly, this works. And so I use it, you know? The best tool for the job is the one that you have, okay? So don't stress and obsess over having the right tool for every application because the guy that stresses and obsesses over having the right tool and always makes sure he has the right tool, well, guess what? He doesn't get any projects done because he's always researching what's the best tool and what's the right tool and blah, blah, blah. And he never actually does anything with them. So don't be that guy. Be the guy that just uses the tools that you have to build awesome stuff, okay? Remember, there's 1,000 ways to skin a cat. So I would say the important thing to take away from this video is that you make sure you skin 1,000 cats, all right? If everybody skinned 1,000 cats, this world would be a better place. Wouldn't you agree? I'm just joshing you. Not really. Don't get your panties in a bunch, you cat lovers, all right? So yeah, that pretty much wraps up this video. Considering the vast amount of immense, valuable knowledge that I just unloaded, I would recommend that you share this video with everybody you know, hit the like button, and we'll see you next time. Samurai out.